Hi guys, Dr. Chloe Koskinen here from Mobility Doc. Today I'm going to talk to you about shoulder mechanics. And when I say shoulder mechanics, what I'm really talking about is the whole shoulder complex. As you'll see, it's definitely pretty complicated in terms of the way you go about moving your shoulder, and you might not even really realize it. Your shoulder joint has the most amount of range of motion of any joint in your body. So in order to be able to have that, there are a lot of key players that allow your shoulder to be able to move the way that they're supposed to. So you have your thoracic spine, or your middle back. You have your scapula, or your shoulder blade. And then you have your humerus, or your upper arm bone. Then as well, you have your shoulder blade that moves on your rib cage. So as you can see, there are a lot of components in terms of being able to allow your shoulder to be able to move the way that you want it to.
Okay, so let's visualize this anatomy. So here is the thoracic spine. So this is the back, this is the middle back. Here is the shoulder blade, or the scapula. And then here is the humerus. This is the upper arm bone. Now, obviously the rib cage is underneath there. So your thoracic spine has to be able to extend. Your shoulder blade has to be able to rotate up in order to allow the humerus to be able to rotate up as well. What ends up happening though is that this space gets kind of closed down because there's a fault either in the thoracic spine, the shoulder blade, or the humerus. Typically though, it's a combination of all of those.
So let's apply that anatomy lesson to looking at the body. So we had talked about your thoracic spine, which is your middle back. That's kind of at your foundation. Then you have your rib cage, which your shoulder blade is going to move on. So you have your shoulder blade, then the actual shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint, is comprised of your scapula and your humerus, your upper arm bone. So when you go to move your shoulder, the thing that ends up happening is your thoracic spine moves, your scapula moves on your rib cage, and then the humerus moves within the shoulder joint, so it moves on the scapula. In terms of ideal range of motion, what we're looking for is in the thoracic spine, we're looking for thoracic extension. What typically happens, because everything is in front of us, is our thoracic spine kind of becomes more like spinal flexion. So it's really important at the foundation of moving is that you have enough thoracic extension. So what happens though is people get a little confused. They think of thoracic extension as scapular retraction. What we're actually looking for is the ability for the spine to be able to extend. So that means that the back, like that kind of bony part, is pushing in toward the sternum. It has nothing to do with the way that my shoulder blade moves. However, those motions end up being coupled. Typically, when people try to find thoracic extension, they try to retract their shoulders. So my challenge to you will be able to find this thoracic extension without retracting the shoulders. There are some great exercises to be able to improve that. Then the next thing is that the shoulder blade has to be able to rotate on the rib cage in order to open up the space in the joint. So the shoulder blade has to be able to move along the side of the rib cage. What happens is if you've had a certain amount of shoulder dysfunction, your shoulder is going to want to lift up like this when you bring it overhead. Now, as much as you can, you're going to try to keep your shoulder away from your ear as you bring that shoulder blade on the side of the rib cage. So you might even want to think about like reaching out through those fingertips. That's what will help to get that shoulder blade to be able to move a little more easily. Again, there are specific exercises for being able to isolate that motion. Finally, we need to make sure that the shoulder is in external rotation when we bring that arm overhead. So what happens with most of us is that our shoulders kind of turned in. And what I mean is that that bicep is turning in toward midline. What we're trying to do is we're trying to move that shoulder, that bicep, so it's pointing out. That's shoulder external rotation. That's what's going to make it a little bit easier to bring that arm overhead, and it's going to prevent the impingement at the top of the shoulder. Again, if you're missing some of that shoulder external rotation range of motion when you bring your arm overhead, you're going to be more inclined to bring your shoulder up toward your ear or kind of turn in or bend your elbow. So again, we're looking for as much external rotation as possible as you bring that arm overhead. Finally, putting it all together, we need thoracic extension. Then we need to let the shoulder blade move on the side of the rib cage. So the tip of my shoulder blade is coming on the side, so it's not staying down or pushed back. Then what I also need is I need external rotation of my shoulder, and I need to make sure that my shoulder is in a neutral position so that humerus isn't sliding forward. That's what's going to allow me to bring my arm overhead. Now, this video, I'm sure, will highlight just how complicated it is to move your shoulder well. So that's why I suggest checking out the other videos to improve thoracic extension, scapular mobility, and then glenohumeral joint flexibility.